Hey guys, since our last video about the CPU SBD sponsorship, we've caused quite a stir, and I've actually had the opportunity to speak with Ben Banks, the owner of SBD Apparel. I've spoken with Ryan Stinn, the owner of SBD Canada, and I've spoken with Mike Armstrong, the owner of Strong Arm, and through him spoken to Titan a little bit further. So there's a couple things I want to clear up. Number one, out of respect for Ben Banks, the owner of SBD, he wanted to make sure that my video was not misconstrued. That was his biggest concern with it, was that he's worried that people look at it and think that it was an individual deal that was offered to me that would affect other individual deals offered to other athletes, and that's not the case. Most of the rest of the Open team have their own separate deals. This was a blanket term team deal that was contingent on all of the athletes in the CPU Open team accepting it in order for it to go through. In my eyes, that's still, however, the same outcome of me and Adam having to choose and potentially being able to make a decision that would be at the expense of our teammates. And that's kind of the end of that. That's the way it's going to be. That's the deal that's struck, and that's just the way it is. I think the onus is somewhat on the CPU for having signed that deal and put that through without checking with the athletes, without being more transparent. But again, I really don't want to vilify and be divisive and get people taking sides and slinging shit. That's not my intent here. My intent is good discussion. Anyways, I do want to say publicly that if I receive any of the SBD prize money, I'm going to be putting it towards prize money at Western Championships here coming up. I've talked to Shane Martin, the meet director, already, and any money that I do win from the championships from SBD is going to be put into that. I think it'd be pretty two-faced of me to complain about this sponsorship and whine and make a big public deal of it, and then accept the money and be like, oh, okay, but you know, I'll take the money. Another thing I wanted to mention is that as a result of some of this, I've had further discussions with Titan, and they definitely are willing to step up and willing to support me and their athletes in some ways that maybe they haven't before. They're looking to take steps forward with their sponsorships for their athletes, and I'm really, really excited to have those conversations with Titan post-Worlds. And it makes me feel really good to have stuck by and supported a company that's now willing to take its turn in supporting me and standing up and sort of stepping in. So I'm happy to announce that. Now, the point of this video, more or less, was because when I spoke to Ben this morning, he asked me a really interesting and thought-provoking question, and that was essentially, what do I want? What am I trying to work towards? What is my intent? What's my focus or goal here? And the biggest thing, in my head, I see two potential and eventual outcomes of having these discussions about sponsorships and the way that we're dealing with and treating our high-level athletes. Number one, as a self-funded sport, as something where athletes are paying their own way to meets, they're paying the federations to be part of the competing body, they're paying their own travel, they're paying their own food, their own accommodations, they're paying entry fees for meets. As an individually funded sport, I believe that the sponsorship opportunities should be individual. And as individuals who pay our own way, we should have our own choice and our own say in what we decide to advertise using our performances, if that's something that's on the table. Now, this kind of leads into my next point, and that is that if we get to the point where, like any other professional sport, the CPU or the IPF is paying us as athletes to perform, then and only then, I think, can the CPU and the IPF say, this is what you're going to advertise, we're going to sell the space on your jerseys, essentially. And I think only in that scenario is that the kind of power that we can hand over to the federations and to the companies and to the governing bodies. I think it's really important, for the sake of balance, that I use this platform to take a second and talk about all the good things that companies and organizations and federations are doing to further the sport from an athlete's perspective. We have companies like Strong Arm Sport who are taking on up-and-coming athletes and junior athletes and sub-junior athletes and trying to provide them with support to make things a little bit easier and to ease the financial burden of performing and being a high-level athlete. We have companies like Inner Strength Products, another local company who I probably pissed off a lot with my last video, but they've covered entry fees for open teams and when I went to the Equipped Championships in Pilsen, they covered at least a portion of my entry fee, and those kinds of things are huge. Those kinds of things are very well intended and well thought out, and really just beneficial for all of the athletes. As a result of all of this hullabaloo, all of this stink that we've caused, or that I've caused anyways, I've had really good conversations with SBD Canada, with SBD, with Titan through Mike at Strongarm, and I think that these kinds of conversations are exactly what we need to be having as athletes. I think that it's important that as athletes we realize that we hold more power than I think some of these companies and federations maybe give us credit for. And I think that it's important that we stop and ask questions, and that we wonder how these sponsorships are going to work, and how our names are being used, and our brands and our images are being presented in things. And I think it's our due diligence to make sure that that aligns with what we want to see out there. On the flip side of all this, it's our responsibility as athletes and as people in public space to be respectful members of the community. We're responsible for our words and our actions, and it is our responsibility to not be knee-jerk or reactionary, but I think it's important to remember that we have more power than we might think. In closing, I want to mention that I don't believe any of these companies acted of ill will. I don't think that any of these things were maliciously intended, but I did want to be transparent with the process and the way that it was presented and the eventual outcome of these kinds of things. And I think it's important that people know what's going on at the upper levels, so that we can question things and make smarter decisions and be involved in a more democratic process as we move forward as a sport. Anyways, thanks for tuning in, guys. This will be the last we talk about this stuff. I do want to make a point of saying that our channel is not about drama. It's not about bashing or calling things out. This is something I wanted to bring attention to. And now we're going to go get back to lifting and Form Check Fridays and educational videos, because that's way more our intent with all of this stuff. Thanks for tuning in, guys. Bye-bye.